It's time for another Casual Friday video, and today I'm going back to our roots with some more children's books. A while back I promised to do a video following up on my commentary on Percy Jackson, so here we are finally. If Percy Jackson allows readers to invest in a character's power, then what happens when readers are asked to invest in a child's trauma? Percy Jackson's story dwells on trauma, but it is a trauma that comes from extraordinary circumstances, being singled out as a hero with powers, destiny, and a target on his back as a result. The effect of reading Percy's story is excitement, entertainment. His experiences are supernatural and presented with a lighthearted tone. This is an experience of trauma not meant to draw readers into feeling as bad as the character claims to feel. Instead, Percy is wish fulfillment, of a child becoming more than they are. Then we get a very different story in the psychological realism of Jacob Have I Loved, by Katherine Paterson. Here is a story about a child whose experiences could really happen. The protagonist is Sarah Louise, or Wheeze as she goes by, a young girl growing up in a small fishing village in the 1940s. She has a desire to leave it all behind and do something important with her life, but her own self-doubt and jealousy of her more talented and delicate sister prevent her from actually doing anything notable, or even of expressing her desires to anyone. When I teach Jacob Have I Loved, I draw attention to a rift between middle grade fiction written before the Second World War and after. It's a split we talk about all the time in literary studies as a kind of collective loss of innocence, that retreating from the conditions of the real world is not a responsible approach for engaging readers. Since I control the reading lists in my classes, I get to cherry pick the readings to demonstrate these distinctions between classic and modern fiction. Modern fiction that considers childhood as a complex and traumatic state of being, more so than older children's works. As a novel set during the war, but not about it, Jacob Have I Loved is a great example of that loss of innocence. Indeed, Wheeze regards news of the war as her own loss of innocence. In Percy Jackson and Jacob Have I Loved, the world of the child is presented as much more daunting and unconquerable than in classic children's works. Whether it's nature or man that present challenges. So in this vein, Wheeze feels trapped by her strict religious upbringing, low-class, isolated, and poorly educated neighbors, her community's perilous economics, the awesome power of coastal storms, and ultimately the feeling that she has been singled out by God as a scapegoat. The title of the novel is based on a biblical passage, Jacob Have I Loved, Esau Have I Hated, that Wheeze regards as an indication of God's arbitrary favoring of some people at the expense of others. Wheeze believes that this is manifested in the contrast between herself and her much more popular and fragile sister. Ironically, Louise's feelings are narcissistic. She believes everything bad that happens in the world is happening to her, not around her. Narcissism is a natural feeling for children. They lack the experience to realize that the whole world isn't about them. It's something most well-adjusted kids grow out of. Wheeze is much slower to mature in this way than other children, including other children in the novel. She thinks that her sister Caroline is selfish and greedy for taking her family and friends' attention and love. But Wheeze fails to consider her own power in making things better for herself, instead assuming that she has no control at all, indeed finding her sense of identity in that misery, in this concept that she is singled out for suffering. After a bout of depression and some revelatory conversations, Wheeze comes to realize that the only thing holding her back from success and fulfillment is her resentment for everyone, especially herself, for not recognizing what makes her unique. In an epilogue, Louise moves to an even more isolated town, works as a nurse, and marries an ordinary man. She finds a sort of happiness in her ordinary life because she is special to the rest of the village. An outsider, she is also the town's only medical professional, and everybody needs her as a result. After waiting so long to be recognized as special, Wheeze learns to create her own conditions for experiencing what she needs from life. In fantasies like Percy Jackson and Harry Potter, salvation comes mainly from external forces, friends and allies, supernatural powers, extraordinary luck. Realistic stories like Jacob Have I Loved give us psychological and emotional redemptions that come from characters' shifts in perspective about themselves and the world around them. Where we are meant to mostly enjoy the adventure of the challenges Percy Jackson and Harry Potter suffer through, Jacob Have I Loved invites us to much more work through the characters' traumas as we would our own. Wheeze complains bitterly about being nobody, yet she is the hero of her own story, the story being read. And I think that can register with readers who likewise feel neglected or not special. After all, the self is the most important person to the self, and Wheeze works through the complexities of what that means in a world full of competing selves. Both of these classes of children's fiction to me seem really valuable for young readers for exploring the nuances of empathy.